Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Stephen Hernandez. He's the Director of Public Policy and Research for the Connecticut Commission on Children. He's a staff attorney and also a bullying expert, and that's really our topic today. We're going to talk about bullying. Stephen, thank you for being on the show, by the way.
Thank you for having me.
It's a hot button issue lately, for sure, bullying. Maybe sort of a lay person's definition about what bullying is, because maybe people don't exactly understand it, especially in the sense of now bullying is online. It's part of social media as well, right?
Right. Well, rather than quote the statute itself, I think, for us to think of it easily, it's behavior or words that hurt. I think that's the easiest way to look at it. And in terms of how it looks on the playground, how it looks at school, how it looks on the internet, it's behavior and words that hurt in a particular way, and it's targeted and it's repeated. So it's not a one-time fight on the playground. It's not name calling on the street necessarily, but it's targeted against one child and it's repeated.
Because there was a time when it was easily defined, a bully, like you said, on the playground. But then it was discovered that people were really beginning to bully online, and it's a lot easier to do it online because there are certain instances where you can be anonymous online.
That's right. The interesting thing about online is that, and really the most intriguing thing and mysterious thing for a lot of people about online bullying and cyberbullying, as we call it, is that it feels different. It feels like somehow it's a different animal, that we've run into new territory. But the only real difference with cyberbullying and online bullying is that you can reach more people. You can really broadcast much, much faster. And you're right, there is a possibility of being anonymous. You can hide behind the screen. And you said, in the old days, and it's true, bullying was much more easily recognizable because it happened on the playground, it happened in the hallway, it happened on the way to and from school, on the school bus, and it still happens in all those places. But now, with cyberbullying and with these new methods that young people and children have with communicating with each other, it's really taken on a new flavor, but it's the same beast. And
yeah, it depends on, I would imagine, if a person's feelings, what happens to them being the victim of bullying. You can call it bullying. If they feel the same way on the playground as they did by somebody doing something via social media, then it's still bullying.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Bullying in general, basically what I want to ask you is, how was it decided that it took something like, for example, the Connecticut Commission on Children to exist for something like this to be front and center for you to take an active interest in it?
Well, sure. I think parents, teachers, children have been concerned with and dealing with bullying for a long, long time. I think that, and we can remember from our own childhood instances of having to deal with either situations where you were either targeted, or some kids even remember being the bullies themselves. We've been dealing with this for a long time, but recently, with more high-profile cases coming to the fore of children who are bullied who either turn violence on themselves or onto others, I think states have responded across the nation with laws meant to curb bullying in some way. Some states call them school climate laws because we think of it as a prevention question. Other states call them anti-bullying laws. In our state, we have both. We have both anti-bullying and school climate aspects to our law. And essentially what they do is prevent first and then address secondly.
I think that, and that's so key, just like in other areas of life, having preventative maintenance on your car. Why do it while it's convenient for you, not when it breaks down on the highway? Your health, work out, eat right, preventive, so you don't need to go in for surgery at some point. Prevent bullying from happening in the first place, and then it's not as much of a need to address it. Because the horse is already out of the barn at that point.
That's right, and I think what we've found in most instances of bullying is that the point at which a child is a target, or a child is a perpetrator, or a young person is a target or a perpetrator, is really the emergency point. There are so many points along the way that signal potential behavior and potential targeting and potential problems. And this is what school climate tends to address. is how do children, how are adults modeling in a school? How are children expected to treat each other? What sort of lessons are being learned about empathy and sympathy and behavior? How are children leading and young people leading the discussion on how to address a lot of these issues?
I think bullying is one of those things where it was tough to get people to acknowledge it at first. Maybe parents would go, "Oh, you got to let that roll off you." You know what I
Sure.
mean? It really wasn't acknowledged. And to go even further, cyberbullying, it was probably tougher even to acknowledge that it even existed online, even after bullying was accepted as something that happened on the playgrounds.
That's right. There are two layers of difficulty with acknowledging bullying. One of them is, of course, your children. No one wants to think that their child could be a perpetrator. No one wants to talk about how their child could be a victim. Everyone who thinks of this issue thinks, well, if our child were more resilient, if the kid fights back.
Right. They want their kid to be tougher.
That's right. If the kid has resilience and gets tough, then that'll stop the bullying. But we know that this isn't really about strength and weakness. It's about difference, and it's about testing boundaries. And that's what children are doing. They're identifying differences and testing boundaries. And it's difficult to address that when, as parents, we don't know how to think of the issue ourselves, because it's a difficult topic really to disassemble.
Can you speak on the psychological impact it might have on a child if they allow it to happen, be the victim of a bully, and just sort of absorb it without speaking up or taking action in some way?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, as we know, there's an especially difficult time in the development of a child, and that's right after early childhood, early adolescence, and going into high school. So middle school is that time that is most difficult for children for many reasons. One is the changes in what they recognize, the changes in school, but also changes in themselves, hormonal changes that children are going through and young people are going through. So these are especially difficult times. And if a child doesn't feel that they have a structure around them of support, an adult that they can go to at every time during their day, somewhere where they can turn and talk about these issues, then this can be very overwhelming. Children and young people don't develop the capacity to understand fully the consequences of their actions or the consequences of behavior.
They're almost like reacting or acting on instinct.
In the moment, until they're 25 years old.
Wow.
25 years old. And we think of college and
right.
we say, well, that makes absolute sense. But we have to remember that our children are developing a lot of these skills that help them cope with and move through difficult situations. So part of our goal here is to help build those skills in children, whether it be through modeling, whether it be through specific ways of addressing bullying behavior, addressing school climate through, for instance, tiered interventions. Everyone gets this level of intervention. Certain emergency situations get more and more attention, and you follow through and you follow the child. That's the different ways of ensuring that children aren't alone in this transition from youth to young adulthood.
I think you were right on the money there with that middle school, because thinking back to my own times, there are some kids, boys, that the testosterone is really starting
That's
to kick
right.
in. They're trying to prove themselves as being the tough guy, and you almost sort of try to assert your dominance, like the alpha dog of the pack or something like that too. In society, in the animal world, and even in human society, there comes a point where there's becomes a hierarchy, right?
Right, and it's part of the developmental process. Really, is testing limits, testing boundaries, testing how learning to identify difference and manage difference, and really it could be day to day. This isn't necessarily in every case the more powerful dominant child against a weaker child necessarily.
Right. That's sort of like the standard opinion of what bullying is.
That's the standard, and it does happen that way in a lot of circumstances. But sometimes this can be behavior between friends, and it can actually be emotional. And sometimes it can be behavior between the traditional boyfriend-girlfriend situation.
A relationship.
Or in a relationship. So what's interesting is that once you start taking apart what we are used to seeing and really seeing it from an adult perspective, when you see it from a child's perspective and you address it from the perspective of the child, the world view of the child, you really start seeing that this is about modeling, it's about learning certain skills and learning coping skills that'll help get children and young people through the day.
I bet you, did you have any idea that when you decided to be an attorney that you would be so involved in psychology and you know, the mindset of young people when you got into this?
Well,
you
it's
know?
interesting, you know, one of the things that we've found in our work at the Commission on Children is that all of these different issues, whether it be mental health, whether it be preventive health work, whether it be school climate, all of the different avenues, learning, ways of learning, they all come together in the child. And you see them develop concurrently in the child, so that if you deal, for instance, with only mental health and you don't deal with physical health, you deal with school climate but you don't deal with what's happening at home, then you're missing a part of the puzzle and a part of the fullness of what the child is bringing into their
You mentioned
day.
some key words there, at home. How much do the parents need to be involved in this, teaching the, you know, we talked about the old traditional ways of how you should, you know, dust off and get tough and stuff like
Sure.
that, but they may not necessarily be right for everybody, right?
I'll tell you, one of the most difficult things that I find is the common refrain in a lot of places of identifying the parent as the part of the problem, perhaps, or looking
By lack of
either
yeah.
through lack of involvement or because of you know the mythology that a parent doesn't care or that a parent isn't involved, or you know, in a lot of these the cases in which children become perpetrators or victims, perpetrators or targets, are so different. And some of them have very involved parents. Some of them, of course, have less involved parents. But this isn't solely a parent issue, but parents do help. And parents help as any other adult would help, by informing themselves about behavior, by being available to their children, by helping build those mechanisms of response that a child can rely on when either they're facing a difficult situation or facing issues at school with, you know, through either being a target or issues outside of school or in cyberspace.
Well, let's take a break. We've got a lot more to get to. So I'll have you give out a website for people to go and learn a little bit more, and then we'll get back to the discussion, okay?
Sure. If you'd like to learn more about us, it's www.cga.ct.gov/COC, and that's the Commission on Children's website at the General Assembly.
We'll put a graphic up on the screen, too, make it a little bit easier for
Great.
people. Stephen Hernandez, the Director of Public Policy and Research for the Connecticut Commission on Children. We'll take a short break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Stephen Hernandez, the Director of Public Policy and Research for the Connecticut Commission on Children. We're talking about bullying today. Stephen certainly is a bullying expert. One thing, the website that you gave out right before we went to the break, what's on it for people to see?
Well, the Commission on Children's website really does have resources for parents, for young people, and for just to concern people around the state about, you know, not only bullying, but all the issues that the Commission on Children deals with specifically. Bullying is one of our issues, and it's one of our important issues because the Commission did help draft one of the original bullying laws in the state. But we have resources there such as, you know, what to do as a teacher, what to expect as a parent, what to expect as a child if you are, or a young person, if you're in one of our schools, what to look for, really.
Okay, now that brings me to a topic that it's near and dear to your heart because, you know, you mentioned Connecticut drafting bullying laws, and people want the laws, especially as they become more aware and more concerned about bullying. But one problem that exists with that is the ability to, or willingness or unwillingness to fund and give the proper resources so that the bullying laws actually have a little bit of teeth, right?
Sure.
Talk about that a little bit.
Addressing bullying in the state is difficult if you start at the bullying incident. It's very difficult.
It's after the fact.
It's putting out fires. It's really addressing the issue from the back, through the back door. And what's difficult about bullying in the state, in a lot of ways, is that we do think of it as requirement. We think of it as law, rather than think of the issue itself as a question of school climate. Once we think of anti-bullying and reducing bullying as a school climate question. And we start thinking about the mental health components. How does my school look? How do the adults treat each other in our schools? Once you start looking at this from the perspective of school climate and improving school climate generally, we've seen some really creative stuff around the state happening to improve school climate, and some really creative leaders around the state leading on this issue. You know, I think of, for instance, Westbrook, down by the shore, a neighbor here. Starting from the superintendent all the way down to the students. And I could even flip that, saying starting with the students all the way up to the superintendent, because it's that indistinguishable. Because at all levels, there's leadership happening. Young people are talking about what they feel, what they experience, what they think, how they are available to each other in these circumstances, and the superintendent is leading. You know, one of the myths about our anti-bullying law is that it takes a lot of money to address bullying issues, and it takes a lot of resources, that it takes a lot of assemblies, books that you have to order, that you really have to understand the psyche of every single possibility and permutation of behavior. It's just not the case.
You don't have to be a psychologist.
You
or a
don't have to be.
psychiatrist,
All you have to do is really pay attention to how people are treating each other in your school, and have some approaches in dealing with it. Creating a supportive, thoughtful environment where behavior is intentional, the way we treat each other is intentional. And I look no further than Westbrook. I look no further than some of our other communities in the state that are where the leaders are leading, young people are leading, and really it's engagement and it's conversation. It's all the things that we know work about democracy,
right?
On this particular issue.
So really, Westbrook is an example to hold up to the entire state. So really, did it start with the superintendent and just sort of a filtering down through all the students and the kids in that community and that school system, and everybody just got on the same page?
I'll tell you what, we've been to many different communities around the state, and what we've found is that where there is leadership will happen where leadership exists. So, for instance, where the leader in a particular community, while the leader in a particular community may be the child, may be children, may be young people who are talking about these issues, who care, where they experience a lack of leadership at the adult level, that could happen. That could be the impetus in one community, the fire in one community that starts a school climate effort. In other communities, fortunately, we've seen the adults lead. And Westbrook is one of those examples. The superintendent of Westbrook happens to be part of the National School Climate Center.
Okay, so he's very much plugged in.
She's a member of the National School Climate Center, and so her leadership is an example for the students in her district. And what's interesting is that she took our school climate laws, and when you think of the law really is a starting point. It is the minimal way in which we treat each other. It's the starting point. It's the bar that we don't go below, but it's not the end. From there, there's so much possibility in terms of what we create around laws to make them work. And what she's done in her district, for instance, is that she took our laws and created, for lack of a better word, regulations around the law, explanations, ways of clarifying what the law really meant. And through those clarifications, we saw that the anti-bullying law is really a piece of a school climate way of thinking. And I'll tell you what, that has changed the way that every teacher, every adult, everybody in every school in Westbrook treats each other.
I'm going to assume that bullying crosses all kinds of socio and financial, economic lines. When you talk about different communities throughout the state,
sure.
Would you say that the financially strapped communities or maybe inner cities have to deal with the issue more, or is that not the case at all?
You know, we've spoken to principals in high schools all around the state, and we've had high schools from Bridgeport to Enfield to all the way to Norfolk, Connecticut, in the western part of the state, to the far eastern part of the state. Communities that are so different from each other, as you know. Connecticut has a diversity of communities, and each of those schools, each of those hubs of student and youth life has a question about school climate. And the really interesting thing about Connecticut schools is, how do you answer that question? How do you approach that question? I have found leadership at each of those schools. I have found the question being answered in creative ways at each of those schools about how to address school climate. And we find incidents of bullying and targeting in all of those schools. No school is immune. no child is immune. And that's why our vigilance has to start at the very beginning. How are we modeling behavior? How are we treating all of our kids? And how are we ensuring that each of them has a support system for when they have to face something difficult?
Bullying in general, does it exist more now because it's a growing thing, or is it because the ability to spread the word through, online, social media, the media in general, is just that much more out there where people discover it and know about it? Maybe bullying existed just as much as just that, there wasn't a way to find out about it.
That's right. I think, there's always the feeling that there's more of everything now, and I think part of that is our access to each other, our access to media, our access to communication. We hear more. Things are the volume is up higher. But for a long, long time, we've had these issues. We've dealt with these issues, and unfortunately, bullying is one of those situations where there may be silence involved, there may be shame involved. A lot of young people who are targets of bullying suffer alone, and they turn the anger inward. And that's why it's so important to have mechanisms in place where children feel that they can reach out to an adult, even if it isn't an adult at home, an adult at school, an adult throughout their day, so that they have a way of coping with this and not feel so alone in what they're facing. So on the one hand, even with all of this noise, with all of the media attention, with all the great attention that we have on some of the great things that are happening throughout the state, the victim, the target, always feels alone. And it's what we do to provide the victim with outlet, with help, with ways of coping that make the difference.
Your involvement with everything that you do in Connecticut, do you see what's going on with the neighbors too? Rhode Island, New York, Massachusetts, are they are they spearheading initiatives like this and are battling bullying in their own ways too? Do you see it?
We do see it. One of the states that has addressed these issues more successfully, and I'm thinking of New York City in particular, but New York is one of our sister states, neighbor states, that's dealing with this issue creatively. One of them is having mentorship groups and having older young people mentor younger young people, so that there's that connection, that sense of vision, that sense of I'm going to be there someday. This is the possibility. Children don't feel so isolated. A lot of times it's that isolation that either perpetuates feelings of turning that hurt inward, or creates environments in which children may be alone when they're either targeted by other children or circumstance. So a lot of creative things are happening in our sister states. But I'll tell you what, you need look no further than our cities and towns here in Connecticut, because there's a lot of great stuff happening here too. I mentioned Westbrook, but I think of creative young principals up in Enfield who are doing a lot of good work. I think of creative teachers in Waterbury who are taking the lead where, in difficult times, Waterbury School is facing difficult times now, but there are leaders even among the teachers there who are saying, we're going to join with our students and do something about this. So there are, Bully Busters in Norwich, not too far from New London. Bully Busters is one of those examples where a community approach for school climate and anti-bullying has really taken hold. And I'll tell you, Debbie Kivitz leads that effort, and her kids shine, and they really take care of each other. And it's an example of what can happen in other parts of the state.
As this evolves, this initiative, what would be the next step in your opinion? As you see it growing, evolving, people learning more, what would be next? What would you like to see?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you one of the things that we're doing at the Commission on Children is that, we started an initiative about a year ago where we thought, well, what if we brought, big name people to the state? So we joined with Yale, the Center for Emotional Intelligence, and their friends, and in the Born This Way Foundation, Lady Gaga, and Facebook. And we thought, we're going to wow kids, and we're going to start talking about school climate and anti-bullying. So in our investigation and in our efforts to bring all of this great attention to our students, we started finding kids all around the state who were leading on this issue. So we were wowed by them. So what we're doing now at the Commission on Children is that we're focusing on fostering youth leadership. Because what happens when you focus on youth leadership and youth civic engagement, when kids are talking to each other, and then when they start talking to each other about school climate, and then when they start talking to each other about bullying, an amazing thing happens. Children lead. Youth lead.
Because sometimes a child doesn't want to hear from a corny adult on it because
Sure.
you're just preaching to them. You know, you're lecturing them.
That's
If
right.
if a fellow student says something,
And not
it
only
means
that,
more to them.
young people understand what's really happening at their schools. They talk to each other before they talk to anybody else.
Right.
And they are in the best place to lead when it comes to discussions around this issue and to lead on the questions that they want answered when it comes to school climate. Each school is different. There are some principles about school climate and bullying that are across the board, you know, psychological principles and behavioral principles. But at its core, this is all about relationships. And when you build relationships based on leadership, on trust among young people, then you see less and less bullying and you see improved school climate. And that's what we're fostering at the Commission on Children.
Let's take one more quick break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. So that is our show for today. If people have questions or they want to learn more, I would imagine, like you said before, the website has a multitude of information for them, correct?
That's right. They can reach us through our General Assembly's website. And on October 14 at the state capitol, we're going to be hosting a conversation on school climate. There are going to be young people from around the state, superintendents, principals, a lot of our young people that we're working with to bring a lot of these issues through their leadership to their schools. So it'll be really interesting. It'll be at the state, and we invite all of you there. But on our website, General Assembly.
All right, and so that and any other events that are coming up, I'm sure will be on the website.
That's
too.
exactly right.
Learned a lot today. Thank you. Stephen Hernandez, the Director of Public Policy and Research for the Connecticut Commission on Children. Thanks for being on the show today.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
That is our show for today. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube sites. I'm Sean Murphy. We will see you next time. Take care.